Camera flashes pulsed in rapid succession. Phones were raised in unison. Dozens of lenses pointed straight at the basement technical access door of Meridian Tower, where the smell of machine oil and concrete had not yet had time to dissipate. Rachel Whitmore stood there in a metallic silver dress, worth an entire year's salary of the man facing her, wearing the most radiant smile that money could buy. "Malcolm Shaw," she said, deliberately raising her voice just enough for every investor in the lobby to hear clearly. "You are the most dedicated technician Meridian has ever had. I would like to invite you to tonight's pre-IPO conference as my special guest." Malcolm stood beside his toolkit, his dark brown hands still stained with machine oil, his protective uniform smudged with grime. He looked at her directly without blinking. While the cameras recorded every passing second and the entire lobby fell silent, 340 investors, journalists, and staff all waited to see how this elevator repairman would respond to the billionaire's generosity. No one in that room knew that 8 years earlier, an elevator had gone into free fall from the 22nd floor at Rachel Whitmore's very first construction project. One man had died, and the man standing before her now, hands smeared with oil, his gaze calm to the point of being chilling, was the victim's younger brother. Malcolm nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore. I would be honored to attend." Rachel smiled, triumphant. She believed she had just chosen the perfect prey for tonight. She did not know that she herself was the one who had just stepped into the trap. Before we continue, if you are following this story, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories we tell each week, and let me know where you're watching from. What time is it where you are right now? It's because when Malcolm Shaw walks into the conference tonight, the real question is not what he will say, but how much Rachel Whitmore will still have left after he speaks. 5 p.m. Meridian Tower, Technical Basement, New York. Fluorescent lights flickered across the low concrete ceiling, casting pale yellow streaks onto the cement floor, stained with machine oil. The smell of grease, the scent of heated metal, the odor of things hidden underground, where no one wants to look down. Malcolm Shaw lay on his back beneath the belly of elevator number 3, wrench in hand, adjusting the safety brake assembly. He whistled an unnamed country tune, soft as breath, as steady as the heartbeat of someone accustomed to invisibility. 31 years old, broad shoulders, straight back, deep brown skin warmed by the harsh light, hair kept in short, tight curls that never quite lay flat. His hands moved meticulously over each mechanical detail, as if touching something sacred rather than repairing an elevator for someone else. On the toolbox, a construction safety technical manual with a worn spine lay face down. Page 178 marked with an electricity bill. Hey Shaw, you know you don't have to do that yourself, right, Greg?" The afternoon shift security guard called from the access door, his voice tinged with a mix of surprise and familiarity. Malcolm smiled without looking up. "I know, but if you want it to run right, best to do it with your own hands." On the other side of the basement, a maintenance colleague named Luis sat on an oil drum, sipping cold coffee. "You're too good for this place, Shaw. You fixing elevators for rich folks all day. When are you going to do something for yourself?" Malcolm paused for a beat. "Who says I'm not already?" The two looked at each other. That answer was like an elevator door cracking open and closing again. Just enough to see there was light inside, but not enough to know which floor that light led to. A black Mercedes slid into the parking bay. A couple stepped out, branded sportswear, the scent of expensive perfume arriving before they did. The wife wore diamonds even though she was just heading to the gym, pulling a $50 bill from her Chanel wallet and extending it toward Malcolm with the smile of someone accustomed to being thanked. "Thank you for fixing the elevator on the other side yesterday for coffee." Malcolm stood upright, wiped his hands on a rag, looked directly into her eyes. Not arrogant, not submissive, simply equal. "That's very kind of you, but I'm just doing my job. It's not necessary." She blinked here. Her husband chuckled softly and led her toward the lobby. When they disappeared from sight, Greg whistled. $50 turned down like it was a flyer. Malcolm kept wiping. "Some things can't be priced in money, Greg." Then his hand stopped. On the gleaming elevator door that had just been polished, he saw a distorted reflection of himself. His face stretched, his shoulders compressed like a warped version of the real person, and for a moment he no longer saw the technical basement. He saw the laboratory at Carnegie Mellon, steel tables covered in technical drawings, a miniature elevator model, the smell of machine oil mixed with cheap coffee. He saw himself standing before a whiteboard, marker in hand, to presenting research on safety brake systems to the attentive faces below, and beside him, a taller man with the same deep brown hands and familiar smile, nodding with a proud expression. Then the image dissolved. Only the technical basement remained, only the elevator, only him. On the tool shelf, a small framed photograph stood among the bolts and wrenches. A younger Malcolm standing beside a man with the same eyes, both smiling brightly in protective gear in front of a building under construction. A second smaller frame sat behind it, Malcolm in a thrift store dress shirt, his late wife Imani beside him, and a little boy with warm brown skin and small coils pressed against Malcolm's chest. All three caught mid-laugh like the camera had stolen something holy. The man in the first photo was Khalil Shaw, Malcolm's older brother. The man's face glowed in the photograph the way the faces of the dead always do. Forever young, forever frozen in a moment the living can never return to. From the building's ceiling speaker system, Rachel Whitmore's voice echoed down. She was rehearsing her speech for tonight's pre-IPO conference, and the internal speakers carried her voice all the way into the basement, as if even underground could not escape it. Safety, quality, and reliability. Those are the foundations upon which Meridian Properties builds the future. Malcolm listened, his hand resting on the elevator's body. His eyes moved from the ceiling speaker down to the photograph of his brother, then to the safety brake assembly opened before him. The same type of brake that had failed 8 years ago. Then he tightened his grip on the wrench, continued working, said nothing. But his eyes, the eyes Greg and Luis could not see from the access door, had changed in darker, deeper, like an elevator shaft viewed from above. Flat, pitch black, its bottom filled with something no one yet knows. Rachel Whitmore stood before the full-length mirror in her private dressing room on the 41st floor of Meridian Properties headquarters, where she had built the largest real estate empire on the east coast of the United States. The metallic silver dress clung to her body, reflecting the lights like a layer of cold, gleaming armor. Tomorrow, Meridian would go public on the NASDAQ, the pinnacle Rachel had pursued for 15 years. But today, at the pre-IPO conference before hundreds of investors, she needed everything to be perfect down to the millimeter. Has the guest list been finalized? Rachel asked without turning around, her voice carrying the kind of warmth so carefully practiced it sounded real. Derek Vaughn, executive assistant and the only person who dared to call himself Rachel's friend, stepped in with a tablet in hand. 36 years old, 9 years in service to his boss. He long enough to distinguish between the Rachel who was performing and the real Rachel, even though the line between the two had grown increasingly blurred. It's finalized. 340 people, Goldman, J.P. Morgan, the state's 3 largest pension funds, and the CNBC team will live stream the keynote. Derek glanced down at the tablet. Oh, and one more thing. Bradley confirmed he'll be there. Rachel's fingers paused on her diamond earring. Bradley Whitmore, ex-husband, our co-founder of Meridian, the man who had left with 40% of the shares, and a better lawyer than hers. He would appear as a major shareholder, seated in the front row, smiling for the cameras, while everyone silently compared which of the two had truly built Meridian. Wonderful, Rachel said, her voice as cold as silver-plated steel. Make sure he's seated where the cameras can capture him clearly. I want everyone to see that I'm completely unbothered. Derek made a note, even as he recognized the venom hidden beneath that composure. Tonight was not just a pre-IPO conference. Tonight was a stage for Rachel to prove that she remained untouchable. Even as the Wall Street Journal had published an investigative article about Meridian's toxic corporate culture just 2 weeks earlier, 7 floors below, Malcolm Shaw had completed his inspection of elevator number 3 and was making notes in his notebook, a habit that no other technical contractor at Meridian bothered with. He recorded everything: cable wear, brake pressure, maintenance frequency, component replacement dates, 2 years of records, not a single day missed. No one had asked him to do it. His contract only stated routine maintenance according to schedule. But Malcolm kept records as if one day this notebook would need to be opened before someone important, as if evidence were something he collected by instinct or by the habit of someone who had once witnessed evidence being erased. Greg, the afternoon shift security guard, watched from the access door. In 5 years working here, he had seen dozens of technicians come and go, most doing the bare minimum, taking the money, disappearing. But Malcolm Shaw was different. He arrived early, left late, checked things no one else checked. CEN refused tips as if accepting money would contaminate something he was trying to keep clean. "You know," Greg said to Luis during their break, "that Shaw guy is strange. Yesterday I saw him standing in front of the main lobby elevator, the VIP one the big shots always use, just staring at it for a long time. Didn't fix anything, didn't check anything, just stood there looking like he was seeing something we couldn't see." Luis shrugged. Maybe he was just tired. No, his eyes. Then Greg paused, searching for the right word, like someone remembering something that hurts a lot. Both fell silent. Then the elevator chime rang and they returned to work. The story of Malcolm Shaw, the strangest elevator repairman Meridian Tower had ever hired, sank back beneath the surface, where it had rested quietly for the past 2 years. In the executive lounge, Derek was pouring coffee when 2 major investors standing by the window struck up a conversation, their voices lowered, but not enough to keep others from overhearing. "I hear Rachel has a habit of picking someone at every event," the first man spoke. Thomas Keller, silver-haired, his fortune built on Texas oil. "Someone to turn into entertainment and makes her feel like she's on top of the world." "Seriously?" Patricia Hall, co-founder of a technology investment fund, frowned. "That sounds cruel." "Cruel?" Thomas shrugged. "That's just Rachel Whitmore. No one gets to that position through kindness. And the people who attend her events all know the rules of the game. It's part of the show." Derek tightened his grip on the coffee cup until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to believe it was only rumor, just the envy of those who had lost. But deep down, in the place where truth always lay uncomfortably, he knew they might not be wrong. He had witnessed Rachel's cruelty packaged as wit, then served to the elite as a form of entertainment. The afternoon gradually gave way to evening, and Lauren Whitmore, Rachel's younger sister, burst into the office without knocking. At 34, Lauren had spent her entire life in her sister's shadow, and that pressure was now etched clearly onto a face that had once been beautiful, but was now drawn with worry. "I need to talk to you," Lauren said, her voice trembling between anger and pleading. Rachel did not look up from the stack of IPO documents in front of her. "Gee, unless you're here to confirm you'll be attending tonight, I'm very busy." I need money, Rachel. $80,000 just to get by until my investment comes through." Rachel looked up, one eyebrow lifted slightly, her gaze filled with contempt. "To get by? Is that what we're calling gambling debt now?" Lauren's face flushed. "How do you... I always know everything, especially when it concerns the family's embarrassment. Did you really think you could lose $80,000 at a poker table without me finding out?" Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying her sister as if observing a specimen under a microscope. "The answer is no, Lauren. I've bailed you out 3 times already. At some point, you need to learn that actions have consequences." "I can't believe you," Lauren whispered, tears welling. "You have billions of dollars and you can't help your own sister." "I could help you," Rachel replied, on her voice cold. "I'm choosing not to. There's a difference. Do you want to know why? Because helping you would mean you'll never grow up, and I don't run a business that nurtures weakness." Lauren stood frozen for a moment, her hands clenched into fists. Then she turned away, slamming the door hard enough to make the abstract painting on the wall tremble. Rachel returned to her documents as if the conversation had never happened. Derek, who had witnessed everything from the corner of his desk and felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was the woman he had devoted 9 years of his life to serving. Late in the afternoon, Rachel slid into the back seat of the black Escalade, phone pressed to her ear, conducting 3 calls simultaneously across 3 different apps. Her private driver took her to a tailor shop on Madison Avenue. Derek sat beside her, tablet in hand, continuously taking notes as Rachel issued instructions to adjust tonight's program. Then Rachel ended all the calls and looked out the window. "I'm bored, Derek," she said suddenly, "bored out of my mind. At every conference is the same people, the same conversations, the same performance of caring about things they'll forget the moment they return to their penthouses." Rachel tapped her fingers against the leather seat. "Sometimes I think I need to break the mold, remind everyone why they come to events like this." Her gaze settled on the rearview mirror, not on the driver, but on the fleeting reflection of the Meridian building behind them. She suddenly thought of Malcolm Shaw, that elevator technician. "Rachel," Derek said slowly, cautious. "What was his name again?" Derek looked up. "Malcolm Shaw, elevator technical contractor, 2-year contract. He dresses oddly clean for someone who crawls under machinery all day. His uniform is always pressed. His safety boots are polished. He says good morning like he's in a 5-star hotel. He's very serious about his work," Derek replied cautiously. I'm unsure where Rachel was heading. Rachel's phone vibrated. The name displayed Hank Morrison, chairman of Meridian's board, former state senator, the man who had supported Rachel in building her empire from the early days. She answered and switched to speaker. "Rachel, everything good? I need tonight to be perfect. No scandals, no drama. The stock opens tomorrow morning." Morrison's voice thick with Texas drawl. "Don't worry, Hank, everything is under control." Morrison chuckled. "Good. Oh, I remember to invite a few workers. Investors like to see a CEO who's close to the employees. Make sure the cameras catch it. The ESG scores will look better." Rachel paused. An idea began to crystallize in her mind like winter frost forming on glass. After hanging up, she looked at Derek. "Do we have any extra invitations?" Derek's heart sank. "A few. Why?" Rachel's smile spread, sharp as a blade. "Because I've just decided to make tonight more interesting." They returned to Meridian Tower, where a crowd of investors had already gathered in the lobby to discuss the evening's event. Rachel stepped out of the car, then turned toward the technical basement with an exaggerated warmth that made Derek want to vomit. "Malcolm!" Rachel called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. She stood right at the technical access door where Malcolm had just risen from beneath the belly of an elevator, his hands still stained with machine oil. "Malcolm Shaw, you're the most dedicated technician Meridian has ever had. Always professional, always meticulous. I would like to invite you to tonight's pre-IPO conference as my guest." The lobby fell silent. Phones were raised, cameras focused. This was Rachel Whitmore doing something unexpected, and everyone wanted to capture the moment. Malcolm looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and Rachel felt a flicker of unease. What if he refused? Well, what if he saw through the game and rejected the invitation in front of everyone? But then Malcolm nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore. I would be honored to attend." Rachel's smile was radiant, triumphant. "The conference begins at 7. I look forward to seeing you there." She glided into the building, Derek and the murmuring crowd following behind. Behind them, Malcolm stood beside his toolkit, the invitation heavy in his hand, even though it was only a piece of paper. From across the street, Nathan Price observed everything through a camera lens. 33 years old, Nathan was an investigative reporter for the City Herald, a man who never backed down from the powerful. He had been tracking Meridian Properties for 6 months, digging into financial irregularities and safety violations surrounding the company. But seeing Malcolm standing there with the invitation, everything changed. Nathan had known Malcolm since childhood, and they had grown up on the same street in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, shared the same dreams before life pulled them in different directions. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message. "Brother, what are you doing? That woman is poison." A minute later, the phone vibrated. Malcolm's message. It's complicated. Nathan lowered the camera, concern settling in his chest. He knew that tone even through text. Malcolm was planning something, and whatever it was, but it ran deeper than an invitation to a party. That evening, in a small studio apartment 12 blocks from Meridian Tower, Malcolm stood at the kitchen counter staring at the invitation. The paper was thick, expensive, its gold-embossed lettering catching the light. Around him, the apartment told the story of a modest life carefully maintained. Books lined the homemade shelves, their spines worn from being read and reread. A single-frame photograph, a younger Malcolm standing beside a man with the same eyes to both smiling brightly in protective gear in front of a building under construction. Beside it, that small family photo again, Malcolm, Imani, and their child, its edges worn like it had been handled on nights when the world felt too heavy. The man in the first photo was Khalil Shah, Malcolm's older brother. The phone vibrated. Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor, her voice carrying through the thin wall even before he answered. "Malcolm, I saw a fancy car drop you off at the door. Did you win the lottery?" He smiled despite the heaviness in his chest. "No, Mrs. Jenkins, just a party invitation." "A party with rich people. You be careful." "Those people, but they wouldn't spare each other, let alone someone like you." "I'll be careful," he promised, though he wasn't sure that was true. From the other room came the soft sound of a child shifting in sleep, a small sigh that reminded Malcolm why he kept his life orderly, why he never let the world see how tired he sometimes was. A black single dad in his 30s didn't get to fall apart, not when a little boy was counting on him to be steady. Malcolm cooked dinner, the familiar cheap pasta he made 3 times a week, but his mind was elsewhere. Neighbors kept texting, having seen the social media post about Rachel's public invitation. The jokes came quickly and kindly. "You going to wear your uniform? Don't forget us when you're rich. Take pictures of the food." It's probably fancy." Malcolm replied to none of them. Instead, he sat at the small table, eating slowly, listening for his child's breathing through the wall, thinking about the choices that had led him here. His eyes settled on Khalil's photograph on the shelf. At last, as the city lights began to shimmer outside the window, he made his decision. He would go. But not for the reason Rachel Whitmore expected. Back at Meridian Tower, Rachel held a strategy meeting with her core team. Champagne flowed freely as they discussed the evening's schedule, fundraising targets, and media coverage. But eventually the conversation returned to Malcolm. "Do you really think he'll come?" the marketing director asked, whose job security depended on keeping Rachel pleased. "Oh, he'll come," Rachel said confidently. "He said he would, and he seems like the kind of person who keeps his word, and the question is what he'll wear." Laughter spread across the conference table. Someone suggested he might show up in his protective uniform. Another guessed a poorly fitted rental suit. They painted pictures of his awkwardness, his discomfort, the perfect catalyst for a long evening of display. "It'll be good for him," Rachel declared, silencing the laughter. "Exposure to this world, seeing how the other half lives. Consider it an educational experience." Only Derek remained silent, his champagne untouched. He had seen this before, or something like it. 4 years earlier, Rachel had invited a janitor to the company's year-end party as a gesture of appreciation. The evening had ended with a man in tears, humiliated by jokes he didn't understand and conversations designed to exclude him. He resigned the next day. Derek had told himself then that things were different, that the man had been overly sensitive so that Rachel had meant well even if the execution had been imperfect. But looking at Rachel now, seeing the gleam in her eyes as she anticipated Malcolm's discomfort, he could no longer maintain the illusion. As the meeting ended and everyone left still laughing, Derek stayed behind. "Oh, Rachel," he said quietly, "what do you really want to do tonight with Malcolm?" Rachel looked at him, surprised by the question. "I'm hosting a pre-IPO conference like every year." "With Malcolm? But what do you want to do with him?" For a moment, Rachel's mask slipped, and Derek saw something ugly beneath. But then the composure returned, smooth as silk. "I'm giving him an opportunity. If he's embarrassed, that's not my fault. That's just reality, showing him his place." Derek left without another word, but as the elevator carried him down to the basement, he had made his decision. He would warn Malcolm Shaw. He would give Malcolm the chance Rachel had never intended to offer. The next morning, early sunlight washed Malcolm's apartment in gold as he stood before his wardrobe. Most of his clothes were simple, practical. The wardrobe of someone who had learned to find dignity in modesty, and someone who kept a second set of hands, small clothes folded with care in the top drawer. But deep inside, wrapped in a protective layer of plastic, hung a suit he had not worn in years. He pulled it out, laid it on the bed, his fingers brushing across the fabric's grain. Then he checked the time, listened, quiet still, and stepped softly into the next room. A child's face, warm brown against a pillow, lashes resting like commas. Malcolm pulled the blanket higher with the gentleness of practice, then grabbed his keys and stepped out into a city just beginning to wake. While the tailor shop sat on a quiet street in a neighborhood untouched by gentrification, the sign read, "Alterations and Custom Tailoring" in faded lettering. Inside, the scent of fabric and careful craftsmanship filled the air. An elderly woman looked up from her sewing machine when the doorbell rang. "Engineer Shaw," she said, her face lighting up before shifting to embarrassment. "It's all right, Mrs. Henderson," Malcolm said gently. "Just Malcolm. I haven't been an engineer for a long time." She set her work aside, looking at him with eyes that had witnessed decades of human nature pass through her shop. "But you could be. Everyone says you're brilliant. What you're doing with construction safety research, the paper you're writing." She stopped herself. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't intrude." "I need your help with something," Malcolm said, changing the subject as he always did when the past threatened to surface. "I have an event tonight, not important, and I need to look like I belong there, even though I don't." Mrs. Henderson smiled with understanding. "You belong anywhere you choose, young man, but let me make sure your appearance matches the dignity you carry inside." While Malcolm stood being measured across the city, Lauren Whitmore sat in an expensive cafe, stirring sugar into a cup of coffee she would not drink. Victor Caldwell slid into the seat opposite her, his hedge fund shark smile firmly in place. "Oh, you look worried," Victor remarked, signaling the waiter for an espresso. "My sister is a monster," Lauren said bluntly, "but you already know that." "I know she's a competitor, someone who's outmaneuvered me for years." "Ah, but monster is a bit strong," Lauren laughed bitterly. "She just refused to lend me $80,000. $80,000? She spends more than that on shoes." Victor's eyes gleamed with interest. "That must be frustrating. Humiliating. I'm her sister, family, and she treats me like I'm nothing." Lauren leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I want her to feel that just once, and I want her to know what it's like when people see through the perfect mask." "Tonight's IPO conference is the perfect opportunity," Victor suggested smoothly. "Cameras everywhere, maximum attention. If something goes wrong, it'll be very public." Lauren met his gaze, an unspoken understanding passing between them, but each concealed their true intent. Lauren wanted her sister brought down. Victor wanted Rachel's business relationships to fracture so he could fill the void. "What do you have in mind?" Lauren asked. They spoke in low voices for an hour, plotting like conspirators in a courtly drama, neither fully trusting the other, but both desperate enough to form an alliance. That afternoon, Derek sat in his car outside Malcolm's apartment building, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He had found the address from employee records, telling himself this was the right thing to do, even though it felt like betraying Rachel. He climbed the stairs to the third floor and knocked on the door to apartment 3C. When Malcolm opened it, surprise flickered across his face. "Mr. Vaughn, is something wrong?" "I need to talk to you," Derek said. May I come in?" Malcolm stepped aside, gesturing towards the modest living room. Derek sat on the edge of an old but clean sofa, choosing his words carefully. "Mr. Shaw, I think you should know that Mrs. Whitmore's invitation tonight may not be what it appears. She intends to humiliate you in front of everyone. She does this sometimes, turns people into entertainment. I've seen it before and stayed silent, but this time I can't. You seem like a good man, and you don't deserve—" "Mr. Vaughn," Malcolm interrupted gently, "I appreciate you coming here truly, but I'm not attending tonight because I believe in Miss Whitmore's generosity." Derek blinked. "Then why are you going?" "There are debts that are paid in silence," Mr. Von Connor said, his voice carrying a weight that sent a chill through Derek. "But there are truths that need to be spoken. Tonight involves both." He stood, signaling the end of the conversation, though not without kindness. Derek left more confused than when he arrived, but strangely relieved as well. Whatever Malcolm Shaw was walking into, he was doing it with his eyes open. As evening fell, the Meridian Grand Hotel, the venue for the pre-IPO conference, transformed into something out of an architectural magazine. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings high enough to carry echoes. A red carpet stretched across marble steps. Reporters gathered behind velvet ropes, cameras eager for celebrities and scandal. Inside, staff moved with choreographed precision, adjusting flowers, testing lighting, ensuring every detail met Rachel's exacting standards. Derek supervised it all with his usual efficiency, but his mind kept drifting back to Malcolm's apartment, to those cryptic words about debts and truth. He caught two servers whispering near the kitchen. "I heard the boss lady invited an elevator repairman to the party just to mess with him." "No way. That's too cruel, even for her." "Ace $20 says he doesn't show. 30 says he shows up in his protective gear." Derek wanted to stop them, wanted to protect Rachel or Malcolm, but realized he could not honestly protect either of them. Instead, he walked away, checking his phone repeatedly. Across the city, Nathan Price sat in his cramped office, surrounded by filing cabinets and coffee cups, digging through old records from the occupational safety agency he had obtained through a source. He was searching for evidence of safety violations at Meridian Properties projects, tracing money and signatures on documents. But he found something else entirely, an accident report from 8 years earlier. Yet a construction elevator at the Meridian Lakeview Tower site, the project that first put Rachel Whitmore's name on the map, had snapped its cable and gone into free fall from the 22nd floor. One worker was killed. Victim's name Khalil Shaw, 27 years old, construction safety engineer. Nathan kept turning the pages. The investigation report concluded operator error by the victim. Case closed. No one was prosecuted. Meridian Properties was cleared of liability. But included in the stack was a faint copy. The original technical report, conducted by an independent engineer, stating clearly the elevator cable had been excessively corroded. The emergency brake system had not been maintained according to standard, and site management had received warnings 3 months before the accident, but took no action due to budget control. This report had never appeared in the official investigation file. And at the bottom of the page in the list of recipients of the warning 3 months earlier, Rachel Whitmore, project director. Nathan's blood ran cold. He picked up the phone and called a colleague who specialized in occupational safety. "I need everything you can find on the elevator accident at Meridian Lakeview Tower 8 years ago. The victim's name was Khalil Shaw." "That's specific. What angle?" "I think Rachel Whitmore knew the elevator wasn't safe and let the workers keep using it. And I think the victim's younger brother has been maintaining elevators for her for the past 2 years without saying a word." "That's insane. Why would he do that?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." While Nathan dug into the past, that past was sitting in a small suburban apartment watching the evening news. Denise Shaw, 59, her hair in soft coils streaked with gray, watched the segment on Meridian's IPO conference. When the anchor mentioned Rachel Whitmore's name, her hand froze on her coffee cup. "Meridian Properties' IPO conference is expected to attract hundreds of investors," the anchor said. Rachel Whitmore, seen known for her business vision and groundbreaking real estate projects, has become an icon of American entrepreneurship. Denise turned off the TV, her hands trembling. She had spent 8 years trying to forget that name. 8 years trying to rebuild her life from ashes. She lost Khalil, her eldest son, her pride, the finest safety engineer she had ever known. Lost him to an elevator that someone knew was unsafe but allowed people to use anyway. The phone vibrated. Malcolm's name appeared on the screen. "Mom," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "I need to tell you something. I'm going to Rachel Whitmore's IPO conference tonight." Silence stretched between them like a bridge over dark water. "Malcolm," Denise finally whispered, "why are you doing this?" Because running from the past doesn't heal any of us. Because she needs to be reminded what her success cost. And because I need to stop being afraid of the truth. She'll destroy you the way she destroyed your brother. Khalil wasn't destroyed, Mom. Khalil was killed by negligence, and I survived. We both survived. Tonight, I'm going to show her what survival looks like strength, not failure. After the call ended, Denise sat in the gathering darkness of the living room, memories flooding back, the midnight call, the hospital, the closed casket, because the injuries were too severe. In the inquest, where all the evidence pointed toward Khalil instead of Meridian, and for 8 years, she had kept in a locked drawer one thing: the original copy of the technical report Khalil had brought home the night before he died, the report that warned about the elevator. Guests began arriving in waves. Luxury cars dropped off passengers in evening gowns and tailored suits. Rachel stood at the entrance in her silver dress, greeting each one with practiced warmth, a smile that never reached her eyes. Hank Morrison arrived with an entourage that included both security and staff. He kissed Rachel's hand with exaggerated gallantry. "Rachel, you've outdone yourself. Magnificent." "Huh. Wait for the entertainment," Rachel replied, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Oh, a something special. Let's just say I'm expecting an interesting guest. Might surprise everyone." Morrison laughed, assuming it must be some artist or politician. He stepped inside, working the room with the skill of someone who had spent decades trading favors for power. Lauren arrived alone, wearing a dress more expensive than Malcolm's monthly rent, but looking cheaper because of the way she wore it, hunched with resentment rather than standing tall with confidence. She avoided Rachel's greeting, slipping into the crowd like a shadow. The hall filled with people whose net worth could fund a small nation. They sipped champagne that cost more than many Americans earned in a week. They laughed at jokes that weren't funny and praised art they didn't understand. It was all theater, a performance of wealth and status. Derek stood nearby, checking his tablet constantly. Malcolm hadn't called to cancel. The staff betting pool had climbed past $300. Everyone was waiting for the invited elevator repairman to arrive and become the evening's punchline. Rachel worked the room with professional precision, but her gaze kept drifting toward the entrance. Part of her hoped Malcolm would not come, that he had seen through the game and chosen dignity over her trap. But the larger part, the one that had built an empire on always being right, needed him to come so she could prove she was still in control of everything. Camera flashes flickered as another limousine pulled up. A senator stepped out with his wife, then a tech billionaire recently in the headlines for buying a football team, then a female CEO who had just made the Forbes 30 under 30 list. But there was no Malcolm Shaw. Derek stood on the steps looking down the driveway, his heart sinking. Maybe Malcolm had decided not to come. Maybe he had chosen to avoid humiliation rather than face it. Derek couldn't blame him if that were the case. Then headlights appeared at the end of the long drive, but the vehicle approaching them was not a modest sedan or a taxi. It was a perfectly restored 1977 Ford Bronco Classic, midnight blue and silver, moving with the dignity of something cared for by hands that understood its value. The crowd fell silent, cameras swiving towards the unexpected car. The vehicle stopped precisely at the edge of the red carpet. The driver's door opened. Malcolm Shaw stepped out, and he wore a charcoal three-piece suit fitted as if it had been designed specifically for his frame, because it had been. The fabric caught the light perfectly, making him seem to glow beneath the night sky. A crisp white shirt, a deep blue tie that matched the pocket square. But it wasn't the clothes that drew attention. It was the way he wore them, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and did not need to apologize for it. His deep brown skin looked luminous under the cameras, his hair shaped in clean waves that framed his face, his jaw set with calm control. On his lapel he wore a small pin, a stylized elevator in silver. Someone observant might recognize it. Most would overlook it, but it was there, silent as a reminder. Malcolm handed the keys to the valet, who stood frozen, then walked toward the entrance with measured steps. Phones were raised like a field of fireflies. Whispers spread. Someone asked, "Who is that?" And someone replied, "That's the elevator repairman, Rachel Whitmore's elevator repairman." Derek watched him approach, his mouth slightly open. And this was not the man who had once lain beneath an elevator in protective gear. This was someone entirely different. Or perhaps this was who Malcolm Shaw had always been beneath the uniform Rachel had assigned him. Inside, Rachel heard the commotion and moved toward the entrance. When she saw Malcolm standing there, radiant and composed, her confident smile faltered for an instant. This was not the script. He was supposed to look awkward, out of place, but Malcolm looked as though he owned the night. Their eyes met across the red carpet, and in that moment, Rachel Whitmore realized she had made a terrible mistake. She had not invited a joke to the party. She had invited someone who could steal the entire show. Malcolm's arrival disrupted everything. Rachel recovered quickly thanks to years of performing before the public. She glided towards Malcolm, arms open, her smile dazzling. "Malcolm, I'm so glad you could make it, and what a wonderful suit. I had no idea you owned anything so elegant." The compliment was designed to remind everyone what he was, a subtle knife wrapped in silk. But Malcolm met her gaze with calm certainty. "I bought it myself, Miss Whitmore," he replied simply, "with money I earned, saw a long time ago." The response landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Something in his tone suggested history, depth, a story that conflicted with the simple script Rachel had tried to write for him. Several guests exchanged glances, curiosity replacing earlier amusement. Rachel's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She gestured towards the hall. "Please come in. I want you to enjoy tonight." As they moved through the entrance, Malcolm became the center of attention he had never sought. Guests who had never noticed him before now studied him with fascination. His posture, his composure, the way he moved through the crowd without apology or arrogance, all suggested someone who belonged in rooms like this, even if he had chosen not to occupy them. And for a brief second, as he passed a wall of glossy portraits and polished glass, Malcolm felt it. Being a black man in a space built to overlook him, and choosing, anyway, to stand tall without asking permission. Near the champagne bar, two businesswomen whispered urgently, "That can't be the elevator repairman. He must be someone important she knows." "No, I've seen him before." "Okay, he is the elevator technician. But look at him, that's not rented. That suit is tailored. Maybe he's a hidden engineer or an anonymous investor." Rumors spread like wildfire through expensive perfume and designer labels. Everyone wanted to know who Malcolm Shaw really was, and no one wanted to admit how easily they had dismissed him. Hank Morrison watched from across the room, his political instincts vibrating with warning. He moved towards Rachel and pulled her aside. "Who exactly is he?" Morrison asked, the mask of enthusiasm gone. "The elevator technician," Rachel replied, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "I invited him as a gesture of goodwill." "Goodwill." Morrison looked across the room at Malcolm. "He doesn't carry himself like someone receiving charity, Rachel, and he carries himself like someone waiting for something." The remark sent a chill through Rachel, though she refused to show it. She had spent years controlling the narrative, bending situations to her will. A well-dressed elevator repairman would not change that. Rachel stepped onto the small stage set with a podium and microphone. Behind her, a screen displayed the Meridian Properties logo and the words "Building the Future IPO 2026. "Good evening, everyone," Rachel began, her voice amplified through expensive speakers. "Thank you all for being here tonight to share in this historic moment. Meridian Properties was built on the foundations of safety, quality, and reliability." She stopped mid-sentence. Malcolm had just entered the main hall from a side door, and every head in the room turned to follow him. Not intentionally, he was simply looking for a better place to stand. But the effect was undeniable. The room's attention shifted from Rachel to Malcolm, like a compass needle seeking north. For the first time in her adult life, Rachel lost control of a room she was meant to command. She forced herself to continue, but the rhythm was broken. The speech that should have inspired now sounded hollow. Her words about safety and quality rang false in a room that had just witnessed her attempt to humiliate someone for entertainment. Dinner was served at tables arranged with military precision. Malcolm sat with several major investors, none of whom knew they were seated with Rachel's elevator technician. A woman wearing enough diamonds to build a hospital asked about his background. "There's something different about you, not like finance people. Where did you study?" Malcolm paused, his fork midway to his mouth. This was the moment he could deflect, keep the invisible barrier between past and present. But her genuine curiosity, so different from Rachel's performative interest, led him to answer honestly. "I studied mechanical engineering at Carnegie Mellon," he said, "specialized in construction safety and elevator systems, but I didn't finish." The table fell silent. Carnegie Mellon was not a school for people who fixed elevators for a living. It was a school for people who designed systems, led projects, changed industries. "Why didn't you finish?" another investor asked. "Life had other plans," Malcolm replied, his voice carrying a weight that discouraged further questions. But the damage, or perhaps the revelation, was done. The news spread across the hall like electricity through water. Rachel's elevator technician had studied at Carnegie Mellon. Rachel's elevator technician spoke like someone whose education matched or exceeded that of most guests present. Rachel's elevator technician was not what he appeared to be. Rachel heard the murmurs and felt the evening slipping further from her control. She approached a nearby table, determined to reassert authority through humor. "I see you've all met Malcolm," she said brightly, her smile sharp as glass. "He's the best elevator technician we've ever hired. Isn't it wonderful, the diversity of our event?" The words were designed to put him back in his place, to remind everyone of the hierarchy she had established. But they landed wrong. Instead of laughter, now the seated guests shifted uncomfortably. The cruelty was too obvious, too unnecessary. Even in a room full of people who had built fortunes on cruelty, there were limits to acceptable behavior. Malcolm set his champagne glass down carefully. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm, carrying a dignity that made Rachel's barb seem petty. "Respect is free, Miss Whitmore, and we either give it or we don't. But it says more about us than about the person we're speaking to." The silence that followed was absolute. Several guests nodded without realizing it. Others looked away, embarrassed on Rachel's behalf. She had tried to diminish him and instead diminished herself. Near the bar, a veteran investor leaned toward his wife and whispered, "Shaw, that name sounds familiar. Wasn't there an elevator accident at the Meridian Lakeview site years ago? A worker died named Shaw." His wife frowned. "That's right, Khalil Shaw, killed in an elevator fall. There was an investigation, but it concluded operator error. Quite a big scandal at the time." He pulled out his phone, searching while pretending to check messages. A few seconds later, he found the article from 8 years earlier. Khalil Shaw, safety engineer, deceased. Meridian Properties cleared of liability. And in an article about the investigation process, Rachel Whitmore's name appeared, project director, who had confirmed that all safety standards had been followed. His eyes widened. He showed his wife the screen. She inhaled softly, then looked toward Malcolm with new understanding. The whispering began small, just one couple. But in a room full of people who traded in information and influence, secrets never stayed hidden for long. By the time dessert was served, at least 24 people had begun connecting the pieces. Rachel sensed the shift in the room's energy, but couldn't identify the source. She cornered Lauren in the hallway. "What's going on?" Rachel demanded. "Why is everyone whispering and looking at me?" Lauren, emboldened by champagne and years of resentment, laughed coldly. "Maybe they're finally seeing you clearly." "What are you talking about?" "The man you invited to humiliate, the one you thought would be entertainment. His people aren't looking at him the way you are. They see someone with dignity, someone who makes you look small." Lauren leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And some of them are starting to remember. Remember the accident. Remember who died? Remember what his last name was?" Rachel's face went pale. You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I may be weak and irresponsible in your eyes, but I'm not blind. I've watched you for years, seen you step over anyone who got in your way. I just never knew you stepped over the dead, too." Lauren gestured toward the hall where Malcolm was speaking quietly with a captivated group of investors. That was your mistake, Rachel. Some people don't stay buried. The evening had moved past the formalities. Malcolm stood on the balcony overlooking the garden, breathing in the night air. He was not alone for long. Morrison stepped out, closing the glass door behind him with deliberate care. The cheerful politician's mask was gone. "I need to know," Morrison said without preamble. "Who are you to come here?" Miss Whitmore invited me. You were present when she decided. If I recall correctly, there was something about inviting workers to make the ESG scores look better." Morrison's jaw tightened. He had forgotten that call. Now it felt less like a joke and more like a mistake unraveling carefully maintained structures. "What do you want?" Morrison asked bluntly. "Money, a position, everyone wants something." "The truth always finds its way home, Mr. Morrison," Malcolm replied gently. "That's all I want, for the truth to go where it belongs." Sounds like a threat. It's a fact. Creates require intent. I'm just here to see what happens when the past catches up with the present. Morrison studied him for a long moment, searching for cracks in Malcolm's composure. Finding none, he turned back inside, his mind already running through damage control scenarios. Meanwhile, Nathan Price sat in his office with Derek Vaughn, the man who had called him an hour earlier, asking to meet. "I have something you need to see," Derek said, opening his laptop. "I've been Rachel's assistant for 9 years, keeping her secrets, managing her affairs, protecting her reputation. But tonight, watching her try to humiliate that man, I realized I can't keep doing this." He opened a folder containing documents, emails, financial records, a correspondence between Rachel and Morrison from 8 years earlier, evidence of a coordinated effort to conceal the elevator accident, suppress the technical report, and shift blame onto the victim. "She knew the elevator wasn't safe," Derek explained, his voice shaking. "She didn't directly order anyone to ignore it, but she received the warnings 3 months before the accident. Morrison said that if the project stopped for repairs, the schedule would slip and investors would pull out. Rachel chose to keep the schedule. When Khalil Shah died, she and Morrison coordinated to suppress the original technical report and replace it with one concluding operator error. That was the first step that put her into the world of power and money." Nathan stared at the screen, his journalist's mind already organizing the information into a story that would explode through the real estate and political worlds. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Malcolm Shaw deserves justice, and because his family deserves their honor restored, and because I'm tired of being complicit in cruelty." Derek closed the laptop. "I know you're Malcolm's friend. I know you're investigating Meridian. You have the right to use everything." Nathan nodded slowly. "This will destroy her. Maybe, or maybe it will force her to finally face what she's done. Either way, the truth deserves to be told." Back at the conference, the rumors had grown from whispers into open conversation. Small groups gathered, comparing notes and sharing information about the Shaw family and Meridian's past. Rachel felt the walls closing in, but didn't know why. She pulled a few loyal investors aside, trying to steer the conversation toward the IPO, toward growth potential, toward anything other than the mysterious elevator technician who had stolen the evening. But it was too late. She retreated to a private room, needing space to breathe. Looking at her reflection in the glass door, she saw not a powerful businesswoman, but something more fragile beneath. A soft knock at the door. Derek stepped in. "Did you cover up that accident?" Derek asked, his voice quiet but steady. "Khalil Shah, the elevator fall. Did you know it wasn't safe and let people keep using it?" Rachel wanted to lie, to deflect, to summon the coldness that had served her for years. But something in Derek's expression, hurt, betrayal, good disappointment, broke through her defenses. "Yes," Rachel whispered. "I was 26. Morrison said that if we stopped the project, everything would collapse. I told myself the probability of an accident was low, that the maintenance team would handle it in time. But deep down, I knew I was gambling with lives for the schedule. And when Khalil Shah died, I chose my career over the truth." "And you never felt guilty?" Every day, every time I step into an elevator, every night when the city grows quiet enough for me to hear my conscience. But guilt doesn't change the past. and the world rewards winners, not the remorseful. Derek moved towards the door. I'm resigning after tonight. I'll help you get through the rest because that's who I am. Not because you deserve loyalty, but after that, I'm done being complicit in cruelty. Outside the private room, the evening continued. Malcolm moved through the crowd with quiet grace. When the mother of a major donor invited him to dance, he accepted with genuine warmth, guiding her through a simple waltz that melted the hearts of everyone watching. Rachel returned just in time to see them dancing, to see the gentleness in Malcolm's expression. Jealousy twisted in her chest, sharp and unexpected. Not romantic jealousy, but envy of how easily he earned respect, yet how authenticity drew people toward him. She approached as the dance ended, catching his sleeve. Why did you really come? Malcolm looked at her, and for the first time that evening, she saw something in his eyes that resembled pity, to return what was taken and to let you see the truth reveal itself. You want revenge? No, Miss Whitmore. I want acknowledgement. I want the truth that I want my brother's name cleared. That he didn't die because of his own mistake, but because someone put money above human lives. Malcolm's voice stayed even, steady. Revenge is easy. Justice is harder. And if you refuse, the truth will still come out. You only get to choose where you stand. Part of the solution or part of the problem. He walked away, leaving Rachel standing alone in the crowded hall, surrounded by hundreds of people, yet lonelier than ever. At last, she understood. Malcolm had not come to destroy her, and he had come to give her a choice, and that choice would define not just tonight, but everything that followed. Rachel found refuge in the powder room, locking the door, staring at her reflection in marble and gold. The silver dress now felt more like a costume than armor. Her hands trembled as she reapplied lipstick she didn't need. Then the hall doors opened and she heard an unusual murmur. Rachel stepped out. At the balcony entrance stood someone she had never expected to see that night. Denise Shaw, in a simple black dress that carried more dignity than all the designer outfits in the room combined. Malcolm stood beside his mother, his composure cracked for the first time. Mom, what are you doing here? Nathan called me. He said you needed me and that it's time I stopped hiding from the woman who took everything from our family. The crowd recognized the significance as whispers spread like ripples. Those who had already connected the pieces now understood what her presence meant. Rachel looked at Denise Shaw and the blood drained from her face. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound like breaking ice. Malcolm gently took his mother's hand. You didn't have to come. This isn't your fight. It is my fight, Denise replied steadily. I let fear silence me for 8 years. Let them take our voice, our truth, our family's honor. But seeing you stand up tonight, facing her with dignity instead of anger, I'd realized I need to do the same. They walked inside together, mother and son. Rachel followed as if pulled by an invisible thread toward the confrontation she had avoided for 8 years. I didn't ask her to come, Malcolm said quietly, looking at Rachel. The truth doesn't ask permission, Denise replied. It just arrives when it's ready. Rachel finally found her voice, though it was barely more than a whisper. Mrs. Shaw, I don't know what to say. Then listen. Denise was kind but firm. 8 years ago, my son Khalil discovered that the construction elevator at Lakeview Tower was unsafe. The cable was corroded, the emergency brake malfunctioning. He wrote a report, sent warnings because it was the right thing to do because workers' lives depended on it. Guests had moved closer, forming a loose circle around them. Phones were drawn out, but for the first time lowered again, as if even the most social media obsessed recognized this moment deserved privacy. No one acted, Denise continued, and 3 months later, that elevator fell. My son died. Then the investigation concluded that Khalil had operated it incorrectly. My son, a safety engineer who had never violated a single procedure in his life, was blamed for his own death. Rachel collapsed into the nearest chair, no longer able to stand. What do you want from me? Money? I'll give you anything. A public apology? I'll say it right now. Just tell me how to fix what I did wrong. Malcolm knelt beside Rachel's chair, meeting her eyes at the same level. A public acknowledgement, he said softly. Not about me, about my brother. Tell the world Khalil Shah was right, that he was killed by negligence, not operator error, that the technical report was suppressed to protect profits. Use your platform, your influence, your resources to restore his honor, and for every other worker who deserves safety over profit. If I do that, everything I've built will collapse, Rachel whispered. The IPO, my reputation, business relationships, because those things were built on sand, Malcolm interrupted gently. And maybe it's time to build something more real. Lauren stepped forward, her voice stronger than Malcolm had ever heard it. I'll support whatever decision you make, but I'm tired of being complicit. If you choose to do what's right, I'll stand with you. If you choose to keep hiding, I'll walk away and build my own life. Either way, I'm done living in the shadow of someone who built an empire on lies. Rachel looked around the hall. She looked at Denise Shaw, a woman whose dignity had not been destroyed, even after Rachel had taken everything. She looked at Malcolm, the grace he had shown by giving her a choice instead of simply destroying her. She looked at Lauren, the sister who was finally becoming strong and independent. Rachel rose slowly, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. She walked to the center of the hall. The technical team activated the microphone system. Every eye turned toward her. Rachel took a deep breath and began to speak. 8 years ago, her voice trembled, no longer polished or performative. I was a 26-year-old project director at Meridian Lakeview Tower. A safety engineer named Khalil Shah submitted a report warning that the construction elevator was below standard. Corroded cables, a failed emergency brake. He was right. I received that warning and I did nothing. The crowd went still. 3 months later, the elevator fell. Khalil Shah died. He was 27. He had a mother. He had a younger brother in college. Her voice broke. He had his whole life ahead of him. Tears ran down Rachel's face uncontrollably. And instead of telling the truth, instead of admitting that a human life had been traded for schedule and profit, and I worked with Hank Morrison to suppress the original technical report. We replaced it with a report that blamed Khalil, the very man who had tried to save his co-workers' lives. A whisper rippled through the crowd. Camera flashes cracked like lightning. Morrison, trying to slip toward an exit, was blocked by several guests who had heard the earlier confrontation. And Khalil's younger brother, Malcolm Shaw, has been working for me for the past 2 years, fixing elevators in my building every day. And tonight I invited him here to turn him into a joke, to entertain myself, never imagining that my cruelty would force me to face what I've been running from for 8 years. Absolute silence. Then, slowly, Denise Shaw stepped toward Rachel. The crowd parted like water, creating a path between the two women. "Thank you," Denise said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "Not for what you did 8 years ago, but for finally having the courage to admit it. That isn't redemption. It's only the first step, but it's a step I never thought I would see." A woman with an authoritative presence stepped out from the crowd. Mrs. Shaw, I'm Diana Crawford, Director of the National Worker Safety Foundation. If you're willing, we would like to invite you to join our advisory board and name our new worker protection program after Khalil Shah. Denise raised her hand to her mouth, shock and hope flooding her face. Her son nodded, pride and relief mingling in his eyes. Morrison, seeing everything collapse, grabbed a microphone from a service table. "This is just an emotional outburst. Rachel is clearly experiencing a psychological crisis. These allegations were investigated and dismissed." "Actually," Nathan stepped forward, holding up his phone, "I have emails between you and Rachel from 8 years ago discussing how to replace the technical report. Financial records showing the Shaw family's settlement was unusually low. See, and the original copy of the report Khalil Shah wrote before he died, the one you said didn't exist." Morrison went pale. "Where did you get—" "From someone who finally decided the truth mattered more than loyalty," Nathan replied, glancing toward Derek. 2 men in black suits approached Morrison. "Mr. Morrison, we're with the federal prosecutor's office. We'd like you to come with us to answer some questions." Morrison was escorted out amid whispers and flashing cameras. Decades of power collapsed in minutes, not by a rival, but by the rot within. Victor Caldwell, who had watched everything with calculating eyes, approached Rachel. "That was brave," he said. and for the first time his words carried no manipulation. I came here tonight hoping to see you fall so I could profit from it. But watching you choose truth over self-preservation, that's something I didn't expect. Don't misunderstand, Rachel replied wearily. I didn't do it out of nobility. I did it because I couldn't live with the other choice anymore. Sometimes that's the only honest reason. Lauren found her sister sitting alone on a stone bench in the garden. She sat beside her, and for a long moment neither spoke. I'm leaving, Lauren finally said. Not as a shadow, not as an enemy, as myself. I'm selling my jewelry to pay my debts. Opening a small shop. I might fail, but at least it will be an honest failure. Rachel looked at her sister and seeing a strength she had never recognized. You're braver than I am. No, Lauren said softly. I'm just tired of being afraid. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the bedroom window as Rachel remained awake, still in her silver dress, watching the news on every channel. The headlines were ruthless but truthful. Her phone had been vibrating for hours. She didn't answer. She had spent 15 years building a perfect image, and in one night, she had destroyed it herself. Strangely, she felt lighter than she had in years. The burden of maintaining a lie had been heavier than facing the truth, even when that truth was brutal. Across the city, Denise Shaw stood in her small apartment, looking at the official invitation from the National Worker Safety Foundation. Malcolm was making breakfast, the same cheap pasta they had eaten for years, even though they could afford something better now. But they had habits worth keeping, reminders of where they had been and what they had endured. From the bedroom doorway, a little boy appeared, rubbing his eyes, hair in soft morning coils, and Malcolm reached out without thinking, one dark brown hand resting on the child's shoulder like an anchor. The world could be loud, cruel, unfair, but inside that apartment, Malcolm's first job was always the same: be steady. Will you go back to school? Denise asked. Malcolm was silent, looking out the window. He thought about engineering and research, about the life he had planned before circumstances intervened. I want to think about it, he said. For a long time I've been defined by what was taken from me. Maybe I need to find out who I am now, not who I was supposed to be. That afternoon, Rachel stood in the boardroom facing the board of directors. Every face carried either judgment or calculation. We need your resignation, the chairman said. I know, I've already drafted it, Rachel replied, but I have one request. She described the foundation she wanted to establish, using her personal assets, not company funds, to support the families of workplace accident victims and protect whistleblowers of safety violations. It would be named after Khalil Shah, and they agreed within 5 minutes. Rachel signed the papers, handed over her access card, and walked out of Meridian Tower for the last time as its founder. A week later, a small group sat down to dinner at a modest restaurant, the kind that served good food without pretension. Malcolm and Denise, Nathan and Derek. Lauren arrived alone. They had become reluctant allies bound by a shared experience of truth and transformation. Rachel arrived last, unsure of her welcome. She wore jeans and a simple sweater. No diamonds, no designer labels, just herself. Denise stood. Rachel thought she would ask her to leave instead, and Denise gestured to an empty chair. If you'd like to sit with us, come and sit. Rachel sat down slowly, overwhelmed by the grace of the invitation. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was possibility. They ate and talked about Malcolm's new position with the Safety Foundation, Derek's role within the organization, Lauren's small business plans, Nathan's next investigative piece. They spoke of the future without pretending the past didn't exist. Malcolm watched them. These people whose lives had become intertwined by one person's choices 8 years ago and another choice just a week ago. There are debts that are paid in silence, he said quietly, but forgiveness has to be spoken. Rachel looked at him, hope and fear mingling. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Maybe not, Malcolm said, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is choosing better than what was done to us. But choosing grace even when it's undeserved, because that's how the cycle is broken instead of repeated. Denise placed her hand over Rachel's, a small but profound gesture. Thank you, Rachel whispered. Now we all begin again, Denise replied. Not forgetting, but not frozen in the past either. Moving forward, carrying the lessons without letting them define everything we become. Outside the restaurant, Malcolm stepped into the night air, taking a deep breath. He pulled out his phone and made the call he had been considering for days. Carnegie Mellon, admissions office. Yes, I'd like to ask about reinstating a program that was suspended 8 years ago. My name is Malcolm Shaw. As he walked through the streets, passing buildings that had witnessed his quiet moments of victory, Malcolm smiled. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in 8 years, and it allowed him to choose. The story did not end with punishment or perfect redemption. It ended with people choosing that truth, however painful, is the only foundation worth building upon. Everything else is merely temporary shelter against the storms that will come, and perhaps that is the real lesson. Dignity does not lie in never falling, but in how you choose to rise. Grace is not earned naturally, but given by those brave enough to offer it. Don't end the future does not erase the past, but it does not have to be imprisoned by it either. When you build success upon the destruction of others, does the height you reach ever feel like solid ground? Or are you simply waiting to fall? If you enjoyed this story about truth, redemption, and the courage to face what you've done, please like and subscribe to see more stories that have the power to make you think. Goodbye, and see you in the next story.